Imagine killing time on a quiet afternoon. No danger, no mystery, no expectation. Now imagine one single line on a computer screen quietly whispering, "Don't forget me." Because in 2014, one line did exactly that. And it would eventually expose decades of silence, institutional failure, and a murder that the world had almost erased. This is not a story about police brilliance. This is not a story about advanced technology. This is the story of a college student, a forgotten grave, and a woman whose name was replaced with three cold words: unknown white female bones. Christina Skates was 23 years old, a biology student, quiet, methodical, curious in a way that never switched off. In 2014, she was scrolling through cemetery records, not for class, not for work, just curiosity. Old ledgers, digital scans, names that once belonged to real lives. Page after page passed like static, until one number stopped her. Line 82483. She leaned closer. Date of death, February 5th, 1975. Cause, not listed. Name, not listed. Instead, it read, unknown white female bones. No age, no story, no family, just bones. Christina stared at the screen longer than she meant to. Something about it felt wrong. Most people would scroll past. Christina couldn't. As she later said, it stayed in the back of my mind for months, every day, thinking, this isn't right, this isn't how things should be. Someone had lived, someone had been killed, and someone had been buried without a name. Worse than death was erasure. Christina didn't know it yet, but that discomfort would grow teeth. This wasn't just some distant tragedy. Christina grew up in Strongsville, Ohio. The remains were found 20 minutes from her childhood home. Same roads, same parks, same river. This wasn't history. This was her backyard. Someone had been murdered here, and the system had quietly moved on. February 1975. 3 teenage boys were exploring along Rocky River in Millstream Run Reservation. Just kids killing time, until they saw something scattered among winter debris. Bones. Human bones. It took time before they called police. Fear, confusion, shock. But when officers arrived, the truth became clear. This wasn't old. This wasn't natural. This was murder. Among the remains was a skull. Inside it, lodged in the left temple, was a .24 caliber bullet, execution style. On February 12, 1975, the ruling came in: homicide. But the body was incomplete. Months of exposure, animals scattering bones, the jawbone gone, most teeth missing. Investigators estimated the victim was young, early 20s, maybe younger. But without identity, time became the enemy. Police tried. They compared photos to missing women. At one point, they even wondered if the skull belonged to Patty Hearst. It didn't. No dental matches, no missing persons reports that fit. No family came forward. And so, 3 months later, on May 15, 1975, the remains were buried. Location: Potter's Field, Memorial Gardens Cemetery. Unclaimed, unmarked, unnamed. Potter's Field isn't where stories end. It's where they disappear. No headstone, no flowers, no prayers, just a ledger entry. And for nearly 40 years, that's all she was. Line 82483. But in 2014, that line met the wrong person. A biology student with patience, a researcher who wouldn't let go, and a question the system never expected. Who was she? Because Christina Skates was about to do something no one else had bothered to try. And once she started digging, the entire case would crack open. What Christina uncovered next would reveal that this woman wasn't just forgotten. She was never properly searched for at all. Christina didn't know her yet, didn't know her face, didn't know her name. But she knew one thing for sure. This woman didn't disappear. She was dropped. And systems don't forget by accident. What started as curiosity quietly turned into routine. Christina began returning to that cemetery's entry again and again. Late nights, early mornings, same words. Unknown white female bones. She wasn't chasing a killer yet. She was chasing proof that someone had once existed. Christina went backward. Local libraries, microfilm machines, dusty drawers filled with forgotten years. She searched February 1975, then January, then March. She expected headlines. She found silence. A human life reduced to a paragraph the size of a grocery ad. This case hadn't gone cold. It had barely been warm. Christina started calling police departments. Cleveland, Akron, county offices. Each call followed the same rhythm. Transferred, put on hold, disconnected. In 1975, there were no shared databases, no digital cross-checking. A 20-mile gap between cities might as well have been another country. If no one physically connected the dots, they stayed unconnected forever. And then, one call was different. Lieutenant Don Silvis listened. He didn't rush her. He didn't dismiss her. He heard something rare. Care. Silvis gave Christina copies of the original files, crime scene photos, forensic notes. When she opened them, the case became real. A skull, mud-stained, a bullet hole in the temple. This wasn't research anymore. This was violence. And for the first time, Christina felt the weight of responsibility. One person can only dig so far, so Christina turned to the internet. Reddit, Unsolved Mysteries. She posted everything and asked one simple question: can anyone help me identify her? Within hours, strangers across the world were digging into a murder from 1975, and Christina had no idea she had just started something unstoppable. Christina thought she was asking for help. She didn't realize she was waking up a sleeping machine, the kind that never forgets, never sleeps, and never lets go. Within hours, the post caught fire. Comments multiplied, screens refreshed endlessly. People weren't scrolling, they were digging. Some analyzed photos, others mapped timelines, a few searched names no one had spoken in decades. These weren't professionals, they were teachers, programmers, students, parents. But they shared one obsession. A woman had been erased, and they wanted her back. And then someone noticed something that changed everything. One user searched national missing person databases. Nothing. Another checked archived police systems. Still nothing. This woman wasn't missing. She was absent. This meant something terrifying. If she was never logged as missing, then no one had ever looked for her. Not officially. Not seriously. The thread turned methodical. Timelines were built, maps were drawn, names were cross-checked. The internet did what the system never did. It connected the dots. And then someone found a name, buried in an old article, misfiled, misspelled. A woman reported missing in 1974. Her details didn't match perfectly, but they matched enough. Age, height, timing, enough to make everyone stop breathing. What if they were wrong? What if this was just another dead end? Because hope in cold cases is dangerous. It breaks twice as hard. Then Christina received a message, private, quiet. A family member had seen the post and recognized something they had never forgotten. After 40 years, someone was finally asking the right questions, and the woman without a name was about to get one back. For 40 years, she was a case number, a line in a ledger, a body without a story. Now someone was about to say her name out loud. The message was short, careful, almost afraid. I think this might be my sister. Christina read it 3 times, then a 4th, because families don't guess, they recognize. The sender shared details no database ever held, A scar near the elbow, a habit of biting her lip when nervous, a necklace she never took off. Small things, human things, things only family remembers. But memory isn't proof, and proof was going to be dangerous. Christina contacted authorities again, this time with a name and a family. The response was colder than before. No DNA on file, no missing person record, no legal next step. The system still didn't recognize her. The family had lived 4 decades without answers. No grave, no goodbye, no closure. They had been told she ran away. Now they were being told she might have been murdered. And then someone asked the question no one wanted to ask. What if she could still be identified? DNA testing wasn't simple. The remains were decades old. The family was cautious. But hope doesn't wait for comfort. They agreed. If this woman in the grave was their sister, they wanted to know. Weeks passed. No updates, no calls. Waiting has a sound. It sounds like silence that never ends. Then the phone rang. Christina answered, and everything stopped. The voice on the other end said one sentence that erased 40 years of silence. We have a match. For 40 years, she was nobody. Now the system had finally said her name. But names don't solve murders. They just reopen them. The lab confirmed it. The remains in the grave belonged to her, a sister, a daughter, a woman who never ran away. The family didn't celebrate. They mourned properly for the first time. The cemetery ledger was updated. No more unknown. Her real name replaced it. A small correction that took 40 years. But giving her name back did something unexpected. It made people ask questions. Local media picked it up first, then national outlets. A forgotten case was suddenly everywhere. And with attention came pressure. Authorities weren't comfortable. This case was old, messy, embarrassing. It exposed gaps, missed chances, silence. And silence doesn't like being questioned. But the internet didn't care about comfort. They wanted the truth. People went back to the basics, the bullet, the location, the timeline. Someone killed her. Not hidden, not carefully, quickly. Why was she in that place? Who was she with? Who was the last to see her alive? These weren't new questions. They were ignored ones. The family finally spoke publicly, not for attention, for accountability. They didn't ask for revenge. They asked for answers. She had her name back. She had her family back. Now only one thing was missing: the person who took her life.
Once her name was known, the story changed. This was no longer about a forgotten woman. It was about someone who got away. And people don't disappear alone. With fresh eyes, everyone went back to the beginning. The woods, the shallow grave, the position of the body. She hadn't been buried carefully. She had been discarded. The bullet entered clean, close range, no struggle marks. This wasn't a random attack. It was personal or convenient. And then someone noticed something that never made sense. Her clothing didn't match the season. Light jacket, thin shoes, not what someone wears wandering alone in winter, which meant one thing. She didn't plan to be there. If she didn't plan to be there, then someone brought her, someone she trusted, or someone she feared. That person never came forward, and that's when the timeline broke. Her last known sighting didn't match when her body was found. Days were missing, no receipts, no witnesses, a window where anything could happen. One name kept resurfacing, not a suspect, not officially, just someone who knew her schedule, her movements, her silences. Someone who vanished from records right after she did. The deeper people dug, the quieter the answers became. Because some truths don't stay buried. They wait. They had a name. They had a timeline. Now they had something dangerous. A person who didn't want to be found. Every investigation reaches a point where the noise suddenly stops. Not because the truth is gone, but because it's too close. Online, the pressure kept rising. Questions were sharper, names were repeated, but officially, nothing moved. No arrests, no statements, no updates. Requests went unanswered. Emails received no replies. The case wasn't closed, it was paused, and pauses are where truth suffocates. Then something strange happened. Someone started watching. Messages arrived without names. Be careful. Let it go. No threats, no explanations, just silence with intent. This was no longer history. It was present. Someone out there didn't want this reopened, and they were paying attention. But fear didn't stop the questions. It sharpened them. One document was still missing, a report referenced in other files that no one could locate. Not destroyed, not lost, just gone. Cold cases don't always die from lack of evidence. Sometimes they die from inconvenience. This case pointed backwards, toward mistakes, toward silence, toward people still alive. Christina faced a choice: step back or push harder, because once truth is this close, it demands a price. The silence wasn't the end, it was a warning, and warnings only matter when someone ignores them. Some stories stay buried because digging them up is dangerous, not for the dead, for the living. The conversation online began to change. Less curiosity, more caution. People still wanted answers, but now they were whispering. Christina felt it too, a pressure she couldn't explain. Nothing obvious, nothing provable, just the sense that the room was never empty anymore. And then something crossed a line. The voice was calm, too calm. It didn't threaten, it suggested, "This won't end the way you think." The line went dead. There was no name, no number, but the timing was perfect, too perfect to be coincidence. Someone knew how far she'd gone. And then a new piece of information surfaced. A comment buried deep in the thread. Someone claiming they remembered her, not from headlines, from real life. A man who said he saw her days before she vanished. The witness wasn't sure of dates or times, but he remembered fear, the kind you don't forget even when everything else fades. This changed things, because witnesses mean accountability, and accountability scares people who survived on silence. Christina knew one thing now. This case wasn't just about the past, it was still alive, and someone was afraid of what would happen next.
Memories fade, except the ones that don't. The ones that sit quietly for decades, waiting for permission to speak. The man didn't want attention. He didn't want interviews. He just wanted to correct something that had been wrong for too long. He remembered seeing her, not alone. He remembered a car, older model, dark color, parked where it shouldn't have been. No report ever mentioned it, which meant one thing: no one asked. And then he said a name. It was the same name that had quietly floated around online. Not a suspect, just someone who always seemed nearby. Someone who stopped showing up right after she disappeared. Back in 1975, he had given a statement. Short, vague. He claimed he hadn't seen her in weeks, but the witness remembered differently. And memory, this time, had company. If he lied then, why? Online researchers dug deeper. After her disappearance, he left town. New job, new address. No public trace tying him back. It wasn't proof, but it wasn't random either. When this information surfaced, the silence from officials grew louder. No confirmation, no denial, just waiting. And waiting feels different when someone knows your name. Christina understood the danger now. A name online isn't justice, it's a spark, and sparks can either bring light or burn everything down. They had a witness, they had contradictions, and they had a man who once said he hadn't seen her, but someone remembered that he had. For decades, he was just a footnote. Now he was the missing piece, and missing pieces don't like being found. Authorities finally made contact. Not an arrest, not an accusation, just questions. The same ones from 1975, asked again. He repeated what he'd always said. He hadn't seen her, didn't know where she went, wasn't involved. Calm voice, measured pauses, almost practiced. Then investigators mentioned the car. He hesitated, just for a second, and seconds matter. Investigators placed dates in front of him. Witness sighting, his old statement, his move out of town. The timeline didn't bend, it broke. And then they asked the question he couldn't prepare for. If you hadn't seen her, how did you know what she was wearing? The room went still, because that detail was never public. He didn't answer immediately. He adjusted in his seat, cleared his throat. Then he said he must have guessed. But guesses don't match specifics, and specifics don't come from nowhere. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't enough for charges, but it was something else. A crack. And cracks widen. For 40 years, the case was silent. Now it had a voice, and that voice had just exposed a detail that never should have been known. Confessions are rare. Evidence is patient. It waits in boxes, in envelopes, in rooms no one opens anymore. And this case still had one of those rooms. An old box was retrieved, sealed, stamped, forgotten. Inside were items logged decades ago. Clothing, personal effects, the bullet. Technology had changed since 1975. What was once invisible was now measurable. Fibers could speak, residue could whisper, and metal could remember. Then the bullet told its story. The markings were distinct, grooves carved by a specific barrel. When compared against historical firearm records, a similarity appeared. Not proof yet, but not coincidence either. Records showed the man questioned earlier had once owned a firearm of the same model, registered, legal, later reported as sold. No documentation of the buyer. And then they tested the clothing. Tiny particles were still trapped in the fibers. Soil composition, plant fragments. Compared to samples from the wooded site, they matched, which meant she hadn't been moved far. She was killed close to where she was found. Investigators returned to the witness statement, the dark car, the wooded edge. If she was killed near the site, the vehicle wasn't for transport, it was for privacy, and privacy suggests planning. Individually, the pieces were small. Together, they formed a shape. Ownership of the weapon, contradicted statements, knowledge of private details, proximity to the scene. The shape looked familiar. It still wasn't a confession, but it was enough to move forward.
Evidence doesn't win cases. Prosecutors do. And prosecutors ask only one question. Can we prove it? The file was handed over. Ballistics comparison, witness statement, timeline contradictions, weapon ownership history. 40 years compressed into a single stack of paper. Circumstantial evidence can be powerful, but it must form a complete picture. No gaps, no leaps, no assumptions. Because courtrooms don't deal in suspicion, they deal in certainty. And there was still one missing piece. The firearm itself was never recovered. The alleged vehicle had long been sold. The original 1975 crime scene processing was incomplete by modern standards. In today's court, 1975 felt like another planet. Time had changed more than technology. The man questioned was now elderly, health declining, memory selective. Justice delayed doesn't just weaken cases, it weakens bodies. So the prosecutor asked the hardest question. Is this enough? While legal minds debated probability, the family waited again. They had waited 40 years for a name. Now they waited for accountability. Hope feels heavier the second time around. The conclusion came carefully. The evidence was compelling, but not complete. No charges would be filed. Not yet. It wasn't an exoneration. It wasn't closure. It was a pause.
The case would remain open, active, watching. 40 years ago, she was forgotten. Now she was known, her name restored, her story heard. The court didn't decide her ending. Time might. No charges filed, no arrest made, no courtroom drama, just silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than a verdict. But silence rarely survives long. A reporter picked up the story, then another. A 40-year-old murder, a new suspect, no charges. That combination travels fast. Online, opinions formed instantly. Some demanded immediate arrest, others questioned the evidence. Debates exploded across screens. In the digital age, the court of public opinion never recesses, and pressure changes things. The district attorney requested a second review, not because the evidence had changed, but because the spotlight had. Sometimes, transparency demands repetition. Every document re-examined, every statement re-verified. The man at the center of it all spoke publicly, through an attorney. He denied everything, claimed coincidence, claimed faulty science, claimed memory distortion. When decades pass, truth competes with erosion, but denial doesn't erase a bullet's path. The victim's family was suddenly everywhere. Interviews, panels, podcasts, reliving the worst night of their lives for strangers with microphones. Hope now had an audience. An independent forensic consultant offered to review the case, pro bono, not for fame, for clarity. Technology continues evolving. What if something was missed? And then, a small inconsistency surfaced. One measurement, one angle, one detail that didn't perfectly align with the original theory. It didn't prove innocence, but it introduced doubt. 40 years later, the case was no longer cold, but it wasn't clear either. Evidence pointed forward, doubt pulled backward, and somewhere between those forces, the truth waited. After the second review, the conclusion did not change. The evidence was strong, but not strong enough to meet the legal threshold required for prosecution. No charges were filed. The case remained officially open. Modern ballistics analysis connected the ammunition type. It narrowed possibilities, but without the original firearm, certainty stopped short. Science had moved forward. The physical evidence had not. The primary suspect denied involvement. No confession was obtained. No additional physical evidence surfaced. Time had removed witnesses. Memories had faded. The past no longer spoke clearly. Law enforcement confirmed the investigation remains open, active. If new evidence emerges, the case can be presented again, but until then, it rests in that difficult space between suspicion and proof. For the family, the renewed investigation brought validation. Her name was spoken publicly again. Her story was acknowledged. Even without charges, she was no longer forgotten. Not every case ends with handcuffs. Some end with clarity. Some end with doubt. And some remain open, waiting for a detail that time has not yet revealed. Justice is not always a verdict. Sometimes it is simply the refusal to forget.